Hey, what's up, VC? It's Steve again, Harmless Rebel. Time for another hard rock and heavy metal update. It's going to be a mix of most of this stuff I've had for a while. There's a few newer ones, but I guess this is kind of a what's spinning more than a vinyl update. But still, some really cool stuff in here. So let's just get started. First up, Hard Dog from Bow Wow. Their 81 release, Bow Wow. I talked about them in the last video or a couple videos ago. Early Japanese hard rock and heavy metal band. They got started about 76. They were Bow Wow until 83. I think they had one or two more albums after this under Bow Wow before they changed their name to Vow Wow. So just really cool late 70s, early 80s metal band though. All of their stuff is good that I've heard. I've got probably 6 of their albums. About half under the name Bow Wow, half under the name Vow Wow. They're all really good. I'll recommend checking any of them out. If you're a fan of Loudness or X Japan or basically any of the Japanese metal bands from that era, you should definitely check them out because they were one of the first. So next up, sorry, just got a message. Next up, just one of the classic metal bands that just never gets enough attention. They are one of the best 80s metal bands. This is a Warning of Danger from Omen. These guys are so good. The first 4 albums are great, but the first 3 albums are just absolutely metal classics, and everybody should have them in their collection. Next up, so it's kind of coincidental that I pulled this out. It was completely by chance. I've got, I don't know if you can see it. This section right here is all my inbox. And there's some other piles around here. And it just so happened that about 2 days before the news hit, I pulled out this Fastway album. This is Trick or Treat. This is a killer album. This is my favorite Fastway album. This is definitely their heaviest. Just such a great album. And definitely one to have in your collection. They're getting kind of expensive. So get them while you still can. But unfortunately, we just lost the namesake of this. Probably 2 days after I spun this. Pete Way passed away. More famous for his time in UFO, but he was also in Michael Schenker Group, Wasted, Waymog, a bunch of bands he's been in. I don't think he actually released anything with Fastway. He and Fast Eddie Clark started the band. Obviously, the namesake Fast for Fast Eddie Clark and Way for Pete Way. I believe he left the band before the first Fastway album came out, but still, he was just an amazing musician, just a really cool guy, and it's sad to see another heavy metal hero die off. And unfortunately, we're at that point where a lot of these guys are in their 60s and 70s, and man, we're losing them so fast. I'm just trying to get to as many concerts, and that's what sucks about this year. There were 3 or 4 concerts that I was really looking forward to this year that they've either got canceled or I haven't been able to go to, or will likely get canceled because of COVID-19. But I'm trying to see a lot of these classic bands, for the first time or one last time before these guys pass away. I mean, it seems like every other day we hear about somebody else, but just move on. Next up, we've got Sacrament, Haunts of Violence. Sacrament was a Christian thrash band. I believe they only had the 2 albums in 91 and 92. They're both phenomenal albums. Highly recommend checking them out if you're into thrash. If you're into Vengeance Rising or Deliverance, these guys are right up there, just as good as those other bands. And it's funny, these got pressed by Retroactive. I remember Scott Waters and I talking about, 5 or 6 years ago. Actually, a couple of these bands, Mortification, the Deliverance albums, the Vengeance Rising albums. We used to talk so much about how we wish these would get pressed to vinyl, and they finally are. So it's really nice to have these now. And this one, I've had this, so this came out in 2018, and I pre-ordered it. So I've had it for quite a while. I've spun it quite a few times. I just got in the mood and pulled it back out. Next up, The first couple spins of this when it came out, I didn't really like it. I thought it was okay. Mainly because of the singer. Iced Earth brought in a new singer. Maybe the album before this. I didn't hear the album before this until much later. But when this one first came out in 2017, I wasn't really feeling it. So I put it back on the shelves. And I ended up pulling it out about a month ago. And I've given it 3 or 4 spins. This is a killer album. I don't like the new singer as much as Barlow. He was just a phenomenal singer. And him and Schaefer were just a perfect match. But, man, this is a really killer album. The B-side, Seven-Headed Horror, The Veil, The Relic, man, so good. Phenomenal album. Definitely worth having in your collection. If you're not an Iced Earth fan, you should, or if you haven't checked them out, I highly recommend checking them out. The way John Schaefer writes and mixes his metal, it's so good. I've heard people call him power metal. I've heard people call him thrash. I've heard people call him traditional metal. They're all of that. Speed metal. It's all mixed into one package. And they have one album, the second one with Ripper, that I'm not a huge fan of, but it's still a good album. That's their weakest album. Everything else I've loved. Their EPs, they're all phenomenal. John Schaefer is probably this band is probably the most underrated band in heavy metal. Them and maybe Sereth Ungol. Everybody should be playing. Every metalhead should be into Iced Earth. Most people haven't heard of them. It's absolutely insane. Anyway, off my pulpit. Next up, I put off this album forever. I had no interest in hearing it, and then I ran across the CD at Goodwill or something and played it, and I thought it was a great album. I was really blown away. The 3 or 4 albums before this had all been mediocre. I wasn't a fan of it all. This one kind of went back to their earlier sound, and I really enjoy it. So when I found it on vinyl for like $15, I grabbed it. But this is Saints of Los Angeles. Actually, the song "The Saints of Los Angeles" I think is probably the weakest song on here. I really like "Down at the Whiskey" is a killer song. "Face Down in the Dirt" is kind of, the lyrics are kind of silly, but it's still a great song. It just kind of this feels like it would have been a follow-up to Dr. Feelgood or Girls, Girls, Girls. I think Dr. Feelgood is a better album than this, but it's still a really good Mötley Crüe album, and it definitely takes them back to that, the feel of the songs, the sound. It all goes back to when they were when they were at their best. So if you haven't checked that out, you put it off like I did, go ahead and check it out. If you're a fan of Mötley Crüe, you're going to dig that one. Next up, MSG, the debut. I love this album. I've had a U.S. pressing for years. I ran across this German pressing a couple weeks ago for $10, maybe a month ago, and I wasn't going to pass it by. It sounds phenomenal. I don't know. Maybe I'll do a comparison video. I'm not sure if you guys want to hear a comparison video of the German versus U.S. pressing in the pressing wars, let me know. I don't know how many people are really big fans of MSG the way I am, but I've always loved Michael Schenker, the Michael Schenker group, and Macaulay Schenker group, and every other iteration that they've had. But next up, just a repress. You know, I really liked this back when it came out, and there's a couple songs that bring back the nostalgia. I don't know. I don't know that this will ever get spun again. It might. I always thought of these guys, even though they were one of the biggest bands with Mötley Crüe, I always thought of these guys as second tier, I gave it a couple spins, and it just didn't do for me what it once did. There was one song on here that I really liked, and I'm not even seeing it. Yeah, I don't remember which song it was. There was a song on here that I don't remember from back in the day that I really did like, but this is "Open Up and Say Ah" from Poison. This is the recent reissue. I've got an original pressing too, but my original pressing is the one with the black up here and the black here. So when they had this one for like 14 or 15 bucks, I grabbed it. Like I said, though, I don't know. It just didn't do much for me. Next up, let's see where we're at. 10 minutes, yeah. Rock City Angels. So this band is more famous now for being Johnny Depp's old band. But at the time, this was the biggest band in Los Angeles. This in the mid '80s, this is the band everybody wanted to be. These are the guys that were selling out all of the clubs in LA. Then they got signed, and they moved to where'd they move to? They moved to Tennessee. It wasn't Nashville. Maybe it was Nashville, but it was that area regardless. And they signed, I believe it was the biggest record deal in history for that time. And I may be wrong. Maybe it was the biggest metal record deal, but it was like a 7-record, $6 million deal. Which is, for 86 or 87, whenever it was. What year was this? Yeah, so it was probably 86 when they got signed. That was just kind of unheard of money. So they spent like 8 months in the studio recording this album. And by the time they got signed, Johnny Depp had already left. He was doing, when he started doing 21 Jump Street, he ended up leaving the band. But, so they spent months in the studio recording Young Man's Blues. And then they started touring. I don't remember who they were touring with. It was one of the bigger metal acts of the time, though. And people were really getting into their music. The audience were loving it. The problem was when they went to the record stores, the record wasn't there. They were getting no record play. They basically got no push by Geffen Records. So the rumor was, and I've always read this, that shortly after they got signed, Geffen signed Guns N' Roses. And these guys were more popular than Guns N' Roses in LA, but for some reason they were afraid that these guys were going to overshadow Guns N' Roses, who they had already done this promotion around. So they buried these guys and then put all their money into Guns N' Roses. I've read interviews where the band says they don't really know what happens. They don't think that was what happened. I was reading, I think it was the singer of the band. Just recently I read an interview with him where he said that they just got on the road. Everything was going good, but the kids were complaining they couldn't find their records in the record store. And I guess they didn't get released until a couple months later. I think the truth of it is Guns N' Roses was just a better band. This album, I think, is pretty bloated. Doing a double album for your debut, I think that's just stupid. You've got, 5, 10, 15, 16 tracks. Half of them could have been left off. There's some really good stuff on here, and I do like this album. I've had this on cassette for years and years. I've always liked it. But there's a lot of mediocre stuff on here, whereas that first Guns N' Roses album is one of the best debuts of all time. And I think the reality was they had these two bands. They had Guns N' Roses, whose album was 3 to 4 times better than this. So that's who they put their money behind. I don't think they ever... I know they released a couple other albums here and there, but not Geffen, not They never became who Geffen thought they were initially. And ultimately, I think had they cut this down to one solid album, they would be a band that everybody knows now, as opposed to being the band that Johnny Depp was in, 30 years ago or whatever. Next up, I've talked about these guys before. These guys were a favorite of mine. Their last 2 albums have been stellar. This album musically is phenomenal too. The album is really good. The problem is they've got a new singer. I don't like him as much as the old singer. And I noticed, I didn't know going into this that they had a new singer. But halfway through the first song, something didn't sound right to me, and I had to look. And that's what turned out. But this is Hittin'. I believe they're a Spanish new wave of traditional metal band. If I remember correctly. Renee was the one that turned a lot of us onto them back when their first album came out in like 13 or 14. Like I said, I do like this album. This was last year, I believe, 2018 when this came out. I do like this album, but not nearly as much as the last two. Next up, one of my all-time favorites. I've shown this CD multiple times when it's been repressed. It's finally been pressed to vinyl. It sounds killer. Stay of Execution from Deliverance, who I mentioned a few minutes ago. Actually, the next band I mentioned a few minutes ago too. I love everything that they've ever released. This album is so good. Highly recommend grabbing this. I don't even know if they're still available. This is one of the limited run vinyl records that was done by Retroactive. And then I'll follow that one up with just another classic thrash. Another classic thrash album. This one's Vengeance Rising. Destruction Comes. This was one of the limited run vinyl pressings from Rox Records. Fantastic album. The sound quality is amazing. I love that it comes with the sticker. So if you don't know the history of this, back in the 90s, you got your Christian metal at Christian bookstores, and because of this album cover, the Christian bookstores wouldn't display it, so they provided copies of this sticker to put over this on the cassettes. So very cool that they decided to add that. Sounds killer. Phenomenal album. If you're into thrash and you don't know Vengeance Rising, you should definitely check them out. Next up, all-time classic, Scorpions, Animal Magnetism. I've obviously had copies of this since I was a young kid in the late 80s. One of my first cassettes was the Scorpions in 82 or 83. I don't remember what album it was, to be perfectly honest, but I've been hooked on the Scorpions ever since. My favorite album of theirs is Entrance, by far. But I love this album. This is one of the best B-sides in heavy metal. The whole B-side of this is phenomenal. But this is Animal Magnetism. And I had never owned a German pressing of this with the band cover. So this is an original pressing. Sounds absolutely phenomenal. This is just for the song The Zoo. This is worth it. But Animal Magnetism, Fallen in Love. This whole album is really good. But the B-side on here is so good. Next, this one is more for fans. High Roller just released these. These are demos and rarities from Trouble. I've talked about Trouble before. They've got a couple albums I don't like, but as a whole, I'm a big fan of the band. High Roller did a killer job with these albums. This is part 1. I need to get part 2 as well. I haven't been able to find it. I didn't want to buy part 1 and part 2 together and then not like it, And I ended up digging this. It's very raw. These are their early demos. Let's see. I thought it said on here. Yeah. Demo from 1980, a demo from 82, 83, 81, and then a live track from a cable show in 82. So very early, very raw, very good. Next, got 2 left. Let's say, yeah. This one a little longer than I wanted it to, but You Will Survive. Next up, I pulled this one out. I hadn't listened to this in probably 7 or 8 years. I forgot how good this album is. I'm a huge fan of Phil Lynott to start with, but this is Solo in Soho. This album is so good. Dear Miss Lonely Hearts was probably the biggest hit off of here. There's not a bad track on here, and he had so many people guest on this. Not really hard rock or heavy metal. There's a little bit of hard rock in here, but he kind of covers a bunch of different styles, brings in a bunch of different artists, but this is definitely one. If you're a Phil Lynott fan, if you're a Thin Lizzy fan, you should definitely have this in the collection. And then last but not least, man, the first time I heard this was about 10 years ago, maybe. I don't remember what year it came out, but I'm pretty sure it was short. It was a year or two after it came out. This was the return of Celtic Frost. This is Monotheist. This album is so good. So good. They went a totally different route. Not that they didn't do that a couple times throughout their career. This is kind of a gothic doom metal sound. It's really killer. I don't know. That's probably the best way I can describe it. It's got a very gothic feel. Very doomy, very heavy. I absolutely love it. This, the first time I heard it, I didn't quite get it. I didn't, they've gone so many different directions over their career. But by the second or third listen, I was hooked, and I absolutely love this album. This is probably my second or third favorite album from Celtic Frost. That's it, guys. Tell me what you think. Leave a comment, subscribe, do all that good stuff. Take care. I'll see you soon.